In this video, I'm going to explain and show you how to build a coat rack. It's going to be a very detailed description of what I do when I build a coat rack. And this technique can be used on many other projects that you have around your house. It doesn't have to be a small coat rack like this one is. Here's a list of materials that I'm going to be using for this project. Since it's only going to be 16 inches wide, I am only going to be able to put on 3 hooks. Now, what I got to make up for the fact that I can only do 3 hooks is I got these hooks that each one has 3 individual sections on it. Now, the materials costs are not expensive. I prefer using oak when I'm building something like a coat rack, just because it's harder, it's easier to router. You're not going to have any issues with it splitting apart. And when it does split, usually it splits the correct direction that you need it to. I have $8.44 in this 2-foot piece of oak, which I only need 16 inches of, $10.44 in the 3 hooks, and $1.98 in the drywall mounting screws, because since it's only 16 inches, the odds of you hitting 2 studs are slim to none. The odds of you even hitting 1 stud when you want it in the place that you're going to be putting it is very slim to none. So I use the drywall screws and I secure the bottom with a piece of double-sided tape. So one step that I like to do before I start making my initial cuts is look at the wood grain. As you can see here, there's some nice wood grain showing all the way across on this side. But when I flip it over, it's very minimal. I mean, there's some over here, which most of this is going to be routed in. You got to figure about a half an inch or so. So I'm actually going to go with this side. So you want to put your finished side up, since I like the wood grain, so that way when you cut it with your saw, it does not chip out or anything. The finish will be nice. So what I'm going to do is square off the corner first, and then I'll take my measurement. We'll be able to sand it down. Most of it will get actually routed off anyways, so there won't be any burn marks. My blade's getting a little bit old, so I have to go slower. So I'm going to measure this out to 16 inches. Make sure you put an X on the side you're going to cut off so you know where to line up with. Double check your measurement, 16 inches, and you're good with this step. So at this point, what some people like to do is they just sand it down and put their brackets on here and put it on the wall. I like to put a nice decorative trim routed in on the edge. It just makes it look that much nicer and pops out. Some people also, they swear by sanding it first before you router it. I like to sand after because of all the grooves on my router table. They can leave marks every now and then. It doesn't really happen much with oak, but they leave marks every now and then. So I always wait until the very end. And you want to make sure that if this is going to be your upside, you mark on it. You know, that way you know. I've had one time I actually routed it the opposite direction and actually had to redo it because it was a horrible piece. So you want to make sure that since you know this is the front, you mark it up. You want to make sure that if you're using a router table that you run a test piece through. I always keep some MDF lying around just because it's super easy and doesn't really make much of a mess. And you're not wasting expensive wood that's $4 a foot. In order to do this, you don't need a router table. You just need a router. You could do it on a flat table. You just have to make sure that's clamped down and you do it section by section. With this, it makes it a little bit easier with the router table. I think this was a $30 router table from Sears. I actually got it free from my dad because he bought it and never ever used it for like 15 years. So that's what I use. when you're using the router, you want to make sure you have either a mask on or a dust collection system, such as, a simple household shop vac. My shop vac actually broke in the middle of recording this, so I was left with all this mess. And when you breathe this stuff in, it can cause issues. So you just want to play it safe and make sure you either have a mask or a vacuum to suck up most of the dust. So the next step that you're going to want to do before you apply any finishes, you need to sand this down now. Get rid of any burn marks that you might have had, any imperfections, and just make sure that it's nice and smooth. That way you don't have to worry about anything. Take away some of the points on the edges so they're not so sharp and not so bound to break. What I'm going to start with is 120 grit and work my way up to 220. The smoother you get the project now, the better it's going to be when you do your finishing. So you can already see the difference in the wood from where I've sanded over here and where I haven't sanded. This is going to provide a much nicer finish for the overall project. Alright, so I've just finished sanding the piece all the way down to 220 grit. Now the next step I'm going to do is, I like to use blue shop towels because they show you the difference. Now I've already wiped this down, but there's always more to there. So with the blue shop towel, when you wipe it off, you want to make sure you wipe it till there's no white or residue from the wood sanding. So just keep going over it, flipping your rag over when it gets bad enough, until there is no wood sanding residue, which there still is in there. A lot of times you have to do it 3, maybe 4 times, but this ensures that you don't have any sawdust in when you're going to stain it. I'm going to be staining it with Sherwin-Williams stain. It's a fruit wood mix to match a previous existing stain. Sherwin-Williams is really good about that. And I'm going to be using the HDX wiping cloths from Home Depot. Those work great for applying stain, but they are not a finishing cloth. So when I'm applying stain, what I like to do is start with the back of the piece. This way, if there's any issues, it's already on the back and you can stop before you make any serious mistakes. But also, I finish my entire piece. Some people only finish the front. You really only need to finish the front as far as stain goes. But you'll want to use a polyurethane on the back as well as the front to help prevent warpage. But what I use is some leftover pieces that I actually cut off in the first video you saw of me cutting the wood. This way, when I flip it over, it's elevated and can dry, but it's only in 2 spots where there will possibly be marks. And it's on the back anyway, so it does not matter. You want to make sure you get down inside all the wood grain real good, because you'll be able to wipe this off later. Do a nice circular pattern. Seems to work out best for me with this stain. Now if you're using like a Minwax, a lot of times you can get away with just wiping it right on. But this stuff seems to, it covers a whole lot better, and you don't get blotching like you normally would with regular stain. So that's why I prefer to use this stain. Just saves a lot more pieces. And as you can tell, I've barely wiped anything down. It already looks pretty much finished. You have a nice wood grain appearance. Now, I don't let it sit very long. With this stain, it really doesn't matter. What this color is the same color it's going to be if I leave it on there for 5 minutes. It's not going to get darker like some other stains. So once I have it applied, I just wipe it off. And as you can tell, I didn't wipe much off at all. So what's going on is staying on. And that's all you need to worry about, is just a quick wipe down, flip it over, now start on the other side, then let it sit. Okay, so at this stage of the project, I've already let the stain completely dry, and now I'm going to start applying my first coat of finish on the front side. What I found to work best is if I start off with 2 coats of Minwax wipe-on polyurethane. I'm going to be using a clear gloss for this one, and Rollo rags. It's a bundle of just basic cotton t-shirts. Just cut off a little section of it, and using the cotton rags seems to get the best finish. So what I will do is I'll start with 2 coats of Minwax wipe-on poly, and I will apply 1 to 2 coats of what I call full strength undiluted polyurethane straight out of the can on as a final finish. I will sand after the second coat of the wipe-on poly with 320 grit. I found out that if you do it after each coat, you can run yourself into an issue of sanding down too much. The first coat, it's not thick enough, and it really requires 2 coats before you can start to sand it down. Now I like to do my finishes inside the house in a controlled room where I can just shut the door and I don't have to worry about anything. I can shut the vent off, but it will still stay hot. Since it's winter time right now in Arizona, it does get warmer during the daytimes, but the wind starts blowing towards the afternoon. So in the garage, you run into the issue of actually having a lot of dirt and debris get into your finish. So I typically just bring it inside first, do the finishing. Alright, so I've already shaken up the can like it recommends. It says basically every 2 minutes or so to shake up the can, make sure it's all stirred. I'm going to apply a decent amount for the first coat because it will absorb in, and my rag is mainly going to absorb a lot of this. Now the good part about the wipe-on polyurethane is within 2 hours you can already recoat it. And I'm sure you're seeing on the video all that polyurethane that I stuck on, which should have been entirely way too much, didn't even cover it. It's pretty much already gone. I found that since the wipe-on poly is diluted, that it tends to also help even out the finish if you happen to have any imperfections in stain. As you can see, it's wiping off some stain because there's a thinning agent into it to make it thinner. But all I do is wipe it on, start at one end, go to the other end, wipe down, and in about 2 hours, this will be completely done. Now the end. So now that I'm at this stage of the project, I actually used 3 coats on here because it absorbed the wipe-on poly a lot more than it normally does. So I got 3 coats on here. All I'm going to do is I use a flat piece of wood and some 320 sandpaper, and I just do some light pressure. Nothing crazy, just nice and smooth, going back and forth. You don't want to sand down too far because you'll sand down in. Once it feels smooth to the touch, you'll be ready for the next part of the project. There's that. And then I like to use a little bit of steel wool just to get down on these edges, because if you use the sandpaper, you tend to go down too deep on it and you run into issues with messing up the surface with your stain on there and having to restain and hoping that it matches up properly. So this just gets down any high spots, any dirt and debris that you had. Makes it nice and simple. Now I'm going to be using some Minwax fast drying polyurethane on top of the already polyurethane project with the wipe-on poly. This seems to give me a better finish. I'm going to be doing it the exact same way using a cotton rag. Just pour a little bit on. I'm not going to need nearly as much because this stuff is a lot thicker. And just wipe it on. Then give it a quick wipe down from one side to the other to make sure that it's nice and flat. This is when you'll start really noticing how all your hard work of sanding it down and prepping has actually paid off. Alright, so when it comes to mounting your coat rack, you need to figure out how you want to mount it. You can mount it using picture frame brackets. A lot of people do that. Some people use 3M tape. Some people use Velcro. All of which work. But the way I like to do it is to actually router down in a hole for it to go down. So what I do is I measure in 1.5 inches this way, 1.5 inches down, and then I mark 1 inch. And I start with my router and plunge in here and work my way up to the top and stop. I do that on both sides, making sure that they're completely even, and that's how I like to mount mine onto the wall. So here's a little trick that I use, since these screws are always going to be too long when you're using 3/4 inch wood. Instead of using a hacksaw to get that off, I find it easier to just use a standard hammer. Just hit the nail or screw and they pop right off. And just give that a quick little sand over, nothing too crazy, and those will be nice and flush. Alright, so the last step, and in my opinion one of the most important steps, and it's often overlooked, is the final coat on the back. After you've made all the cuts and drilled the holes through, you want to make sure that the back is sealed. And I only put on one coat on the back just to make sure that it is sealed, because it doesn't need the protection that the front needs. As you can tell, the front is extremely shiny, and it actually looks really nice. But the back, so what I do is I actually use the wipe-on poly again, and I'll actually pour it down into the holes to make sure that the holes are completely sealed. And then I'll wipe it on the back, just like I would a normal coat for the front. Since this is the first one, you've got a little bit of playroom with how much wipe-on poly you use. This will soak it right up in and seal it and help prevent warpage. Thanks for watching this video. This is a picture of the finished product installed at my wife's work. I also added a few extra pictures of another coat rack that I did, so that you can see, even though this is on a small scale project, you can make it a lot larger to fit your needs. If this video was helpful for you, please hit the like button and comment down below if you have any questions, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. If you want to see more upcoming projects, click on the subscribe button. My next project is going to be how to build TV trays, and I will post a link right here on the video.